and they, bear with me 1 second. Where is that? Yeah, so they've advised that they're working with the Environment Agency on future investment plans for the soil and wastewater recycling. It's not a process that they would ask the developer to get involved with or have any influence over, and when asked if they required any contributions towards any upgrades, they haven't requested any.
Thank you. I was just going to say you can sit down, but
I contacted the IDB and I spoke to them at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, and they claimed they knew nothing of this development. That's all I can say. That was Andrew, the chief engineer.
I think this telephone conversations referred to it isn't going to go anywhere, but thank you for your comments. And now we have, so you two can take your seat if you would, please. And now, members, have you got any questions for the officers? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to go on about the outside development area. Do you feel that the development of the North of Soham has had a detrimental impact on making a decision outside for the south of Cambridge? Is that an a consideration that's given it added weight into passing this one, having the fact that we lost the persimmon site at the North of Soham?
I think detrimental would be the wrong word, but it is a material consideration, like any inspector's decision would be. And so going from, as you've seen, or from what Catherine's written, we've gone through the whole process and where sites would be accepted. And as officers, we're saying on the edge of a market town like Soham, developments of this nature is now acceptable based upon all the decisions and recommendations and also our housing supply.
Councillor Trapp.
Thank you. It was sort of hinted at or vaguely that the traffic, the sort of local highways accepted just the one exit, but would they accept two? Was that ever considered, or was it rejected?
That hasn't been proposed. What they are considering is the single point access onto Fordham Road, which they've said is acceptable. And the county transport assessment team have also reviewed that. So it's been reviewed by 2 statutory consultees. And the only thing that's come of that is the amendment to include the emergency access to the south.
Would it not be more acceptable to have 2 accesses to that site?
That's not the proposal that's under consideration. I've got to consider what's in front of me, and I'm being told by the Local Highways Authority and the County Council Transport Assessment Team that that's acceptable.
Right, thank you. And the other question is, neighbouring developments, do you know what the density of housing is there?
Yes, yeah, I had to look so the Hopkins home site to the north, that was for 120 dwellings and 6 self-build. The site area was 4.8 hectares or 11.8 acres. It has a density, a gross density across the site of 26 dwellings per hectare or 10.6 dwellings per acre. And that's based on the overall site area, including the public space. The site to the east is the other Hopkins Homes development. That's an application that was granted for 78 dwellings on a site of 3.85 hectares or 9.51 acres. And that works out about 20 dwellings per hectare or 8.4 per acre. And that again is based on the overall site area, including the open space.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Jones. Well, I probably didn't have too much weight then. If you can, David Ambrose Smith.
I'm sorry, Chair. This probably should have been a question to the council. Does Soham have a neighbourhood plan?
No, it doesn't have a neighbourhood plan.
it's just been answered. I
Yeah.
can't. Mr.
It's
Chair,
not an adopted Labour plan for Soham.
Have you got some quick comment to make? Okay, thank you. We now move on to debate. As you know, we've got an application here, and it's recommended for approval. Members, your comments. Christine Ambrose-Smith.
As someone who doesn't live in Soham, I think this looks a perfectly acceptable development. Obviously, what we've seen is only indicative, but it does seem to be quite generous to my mind in terms of open space. There is the potential, if it is agreed that it's necessary, for a community building to be there. So, and it's relatively near the centre of Soham. So I would think it ticks a lot of boxes in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more members? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some concerns, obviously, as a Soham resident. Perhaps I'm, aware of the situations. I mean, the drainage situation does certainly concern me in this particular one. And once we give planning permission, it will contribute to this. I have reservations, obviously, about building on the green it's not a greenfield site, it's a countryside, and I can see that this will continue on going all the way up. There's obviously another parcel of land next to it, so I do feel we get more creep going on. While we still have the 5-year land supply, I'm not convinced that we really need this development. So it's not my ward. Obviously, the other South Cambridgeshire have been supportive of it, but we've heard a lot from the local residents stating that there's a lot of development going on in Soham, especially that particular area of Soham. And before we pass anything, I'd like to see certainly more infrastructure put in to Soham so it can actually cope with it. I can feel this certainly will be passed at some point in the future. The development will be going on, but I'm not sure it's currently time to be, passing this at the moment until the drainage and many of the other problems that Soham has, have been sorted.
Thank you. Councillor Trout.
Thank you. I too am very concerned about the drainage. I think what the town councillors have brought to our attention is quite important. And, we have, I don't know what's happened there, but anyway, that's, very concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the lack of a second access point. I think that is something that should have been thought of, particularly as it will, ease the traffic. And that piece of road is difficult. There's going to be access now from Hopkins Homes. There's going to be other, so it's going to be very difficult. I'm also was struck by the fact that there's been a number of sites already due for planning, but have not been built. So there's already quite a lot of sites there going. So it's increasing the size of Soham, even though it hasn't actually been noticed at the moment. And the other one is, I do really think that for a development like this, outside the development boundary, to be so mealy-mouthed about the number of affordable housing, i.e. the minimum, I think is not very good. I don't think that's very generous. And I think although in principle, I quite like the idea of small dwellings. I think we have too many large dwellings being built at the moment. I think we really ought to be thinking about far more affordable housing. So could I put forward a proposal to reject this application? And the reasons are drainage, not enough affordable housing, and the road access.
Okay, do you have a seconder? Councillor Jones. Okay, I'd like to make a comment. I'm familiar with that road that comes from Wickham to Surrey, and it is a very narrow.
Speaker.
Sorry, I'm familiar with the road that goes from Wickham to Surrey. It's a fairly narrow road, and although I haven't had no contact with the highways, it would be logical to try and reduce the traffic on that road and have it in my view, it would be sensible to have it as an emergency exit, but not a regular entry and exit for vehicles coming out onto what is a very small road, which could almost be described as a lane. And I would propose, but after we've had a vote, we will have a vote on Councillor Trapp's motion. I will propose that we agree with the officer's recommendation, and for the reasons set out in the agenda. I don't know if there's anybody who is prepared to second that. That's Christine Ambrose Smith. So I think what we will do is we will go to Councillor Trapps.
Can I just make a comment about the road? I drive along that road and I think it's quite adequate for 2 cars or 2 lorries to pass by. So,
thank you. We all have our opinions about highways.
It's just reminds members before we go to the vote that there were no statutory objections to this development from people that control drainage or highway safety. And it's just before you vote on it, that is something to remember, because that's the sort of thing, if it goes to appeal, that will be mentioned at an appeal process.
And just in addition to that, Chair, the conditions that those consultees have requested are conditions that we append quite routinely to larger scale applications.
Thank you. Councillor Jones, you want to say
Well,
something?
obviously, I've kind of, on that note, we need to amend, the reasons for it and the reasons we're doing. I mean, primarily it's because it's outside the development area, so outside Gross 2. I think that should be it's
The building line in this case is not strictly enforceable, you realise that? I asked the officers for an explanation about the building line because I knew there was some debate about it. And would you like to very briefly re-say why this is recommended for approval when it is outside the building line?
Yeah, as I say, I'll be brief because I don't want to read what Catherine's put in a report. It's simply that this is an area of broad growth. Market towns, which is Ely, Soham, and Littleport. So developing outside the village framework locations for these towns and city, in officers' view, is acceptable. And that's based upon taking advice from legal advice, seeing what the inspectors have decided, as well as internal consideration.
Can we just clarify? This has been, we said it's an area of broadly development area, which is within sort of 2015 plan. Can we clarify, at what point does it stop becoming acceptable? Obviously, a town can grow and grow and grow to the edges, at what point do we sit and say the boundaries exist? Is there a specific, if the boundaries aren't enforceable as such, and we've currently shown no need for development, we've got 5-year land supply, it's outside that. Should we keep passing places to be developed when there may not necessarily be the need for it at the moment? We're just future-proofing beyond the need. I mean, obviously I can understand you need to maintain a 5-year land supply, and that's what previously happened. But given us 7, yeah, at what point do we stop? Okay.
Part of that, so it would be for you, the members, to decide when you think this is no further sort of thing, because this is what you're being asked to consider. You should obviously note that this development is bordered on 2 sides by the village framework with housing growth on 2 sides. So this is not deep into the countryside. This is adjacent to the village framework. Catherine, if you can get that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of our considerations, I'm just going back to one of the first slides. So the site's bounded entirely to the north by the development envelope and entirely to the east by the development envelope. You've got the Hopkins development above, and then to the southeast of the site, you've then got Orchard Row, Centre Drive, and the remainder of Fordham Road. So my consideration in terms of this application, that this is well situated in relation to the built form of Soham.
I mean, it's quite a linear development. I don't know how you could sit and say it's, south of it particularly.
My concern, Councillor Jones, that it was explained to you why in this case the officer recommendation went in favour of this application, and I think they've made every attempt to try and tell you. Councillor Trapp, you have a proposal.
And it's sort of similar to this, and I was wondering whether this, I mean, you're saying it's around market towns, one can actually forget about the development boundary and just sort of build on. Is that part of our 7-year land supply? I mean, is that counted in our 7-year land supply, for instance? Or is it only just the areas under the development boundary?
The 7-year or 5-year land supply is what we are delivering. So just being allocated doesn't necessarily mean we are delivering that, because otherwise we would never have lost our 5-year land supply. And so I don't want to get into too much detail, because obviously this is what the report is for. The key bit here is the inspector, which was the development to the north of Soham, gave weight to the fact that while outside the development envelope of Soham, the proposal in that case was considered to comply with the development plan as a whole, including the location of development at one of the 3 market towns, which was consistent with growth too.
So, Councillor Trapp, are you still proposing to go against the officer's recommendation?
Yes.
Can you give us the reasons for?
Reason because it's outside the development boundary.
Okay.
And Chair, if I may, sorry. I don't know if Councillor Trapp feels, but obviously they talked about the visual impact of the property and using screening. It does represent a vista as you enter the village from the northwest, and it will have a detrimental impact on the entrance.
Caroline is looking to take your reasons down, and Councillor Austin, you'd like to speak now? Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Okay, are we clear what their reasons are?
So were the 2 reasons that because it's outside the development boundary and it would be detrimental to the visual impact and entering the village?
Councillor Wilson, you wanted to say something.
I'm very concerned about the officer's acceptance of building outside of village envelope is okay, because it's nearby. I mean, there's the whole point of having a village envelope or a development envelope is, it's obviously got edges, and if you can build outside it all the time, as long as you're next to it, it sort of loses the whole point of having these envelopes anyway. And if we think that we're going to just say, oh well, because it's Soham or Littleport or Ely, it's okay, I'd very much be extremely upset if you happen to be Haddenham.
Okay, well, we're now going to a vote. I think everybody is clear what the issues are, and it's proposed by councillor Trapp, seconded by councillor Jones. Will those in favour of going against the officer's recommendation, please raise their hands? Will those against that recommendation or that proposal, please raise their hands? Have we any abstentions?
So that motion is lost with 3 votes in favour and 6 votes against.
Okay, thank you. So we now move on to my proposal, which is seconded by Christine Ambrose Smith. And my proposal is that we agree with the officer's recommendation and approve the application. For those in favour, please raise your hands. And of course, we have the amended conditions as put forward by Catherine, included in that. So will those in favour of that, please raise their hands. Will those against the recommendation of the officer, please raise their hands. And are there any abstentions? We've got 1 abstention over there.
That motion is passed with 5 votes in favour, 3 votes against and 1 abstention.
Okay, so that item number 5. That item number 5 is passed, and any members of the public who wish to go, they're welcome to stay, but if they wish to go, of course they may.
Chair, might I request, if there's no opposite views, that we have the air conditioning turned down or turned off? I'm absolutely frozen.
Could we turn the air conditioning down a bit, please? Thank you. Oh, yes. Welcome to those members of the public who've just arrived, and thank you for your patience. The last case was slightly longer than we may have thought. We now move on to agenda item 6 and a presentation by Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. So agenda item 6, the application is for the erection of 6 dwellings on land to the west of 75 to 91 the Causeway in Burwell. So as you can see from this map, the application site in red comprises the main body of the site, which is where the houses will be located and the parking provided, as well as the existing lane linking the site with the Causeway to the east. To the south, you've got terraced properties on the Lees. To the east, terraced properties on the Causeway. To north and northwest, detached dwellings, as well as the parish jubilee rooms. And to the west, a public footpath and the bungalows on Poplars Close. You can see that the site is located within the shaded green area, which is the Burwell Conservation Area, and is also within the development envelope of the village, which is indicated by the heavy black line to the west. So we visited the site yesterday with some members, but for those who weren't there, here are some photos of the site. The one on the left is taken from within the site looking north, and on the right from within the site looking south. The one on the left there is taken from within the site looking east back towards the terrace on the Causeway. And on the right looking north along the footpath which runs along the west side of the site with the site boundary on the right there on that tree line. And these photos, the one on the left is from the Causeway looking west along the access road, and the one on the right from further down that access road, and you can just see the site on the right hand side behind the telegraph pole there. So as I said, the proposed development is 6 dwellings provided in 3 uniform pairs of semi-detached houses. As a result of amendments that have been made during the course of the application, the number of dwellings on site has been reduced from 7 to 6. And those dwellings have been reoriented and relocated so that they now front the parking area to the east with their private gardens to the west side. As I said, access to the parking area that you can see there is taken from the lane which connects the site to the Causeway. In terms of the detail of what's proposed, you can see the elevations and floor plans here of one of the pairs. The accommodation is provided over 3 floors, with the ground and first floor accommodation served primarily by facing windows front and back, with the second floor accommodation being provided in the roof space, served by roof windows front and back. And here you've just got street scenes of the 3 pairs together. So the top being the view that you would see from the Causeway, and the bottom being the elevations that would face the Poplars Close side of the site. So the main planning considerations are what you can see there. We've got the principle of development, the impact on neighbouring amenity, impact on visual amenity and the historic environment, impact on highway safety and parking, ecology, flood risk and drainage. So turning to principle, the site is within the development framework of Burwell, where residential development is supported under Policy Growth 2, provided there is no significant adverse effect on the character and appearance of the area, and that all other material planning considerations are satisfied. Members will be aware from reading the committee report that the site has until recently benefited from other planning permissions for a total of 6 dwellings across the site, although those permissions lapsed during the consideration of this application. Turning to neighbouring amenity. So as I said, the scheme has been subject to amendment since it was submitted last year. The first amendment made was to remove the 7th house from the scheme, which was very tight to the eastern boundary. And later amendments have turned the houses through 180 degrees so that they now front the parking area and has provided gardens to the west. And that's created more space between the proposed houses and the bungalows on Poplars Close, which was a particular concern of officers when we first were considering the scheme. The minimum garden length to the rear of those properties is now 15 metres. Officers consider there is sufficient space between the proposed dwellings and the neighbouring properties on all sides. Those separation distances are provided in my report, but all exceed the minimums set out in the council's design guide, and would not, in our view, result in any unacceptable impact on neighbours in terms of being overbearing, overshadowing or visually intrusive, nor would they provide any opportunity for direct overlooking, which would be likely to result in a significant loss of privacy. The northernmost pair of dwellings on the site would result in some limited overshadowing of the far ends of the gardens, which serve properties on the Causeway, but due to the location of the dwellings at the far end of those gardens and the use of the gardens as they stand at the moment, we don't consider that overshadowing would cause any significant loss of amenity. So the site is within the conservation area behind the terrace on the Causeway and north of the terrace on the Lees. The resiting of the houses off the back boundary does mean that they would no longer be in line with the terrace to the south, which was what was proposed as part of previous schemes on the site. However, as they're provided not in a terrace now, but in 3 pairs, and they've been turned to face the parking area, it's considered that the building line in this case is a less important consideration as opposed to the impact on neighbouring community, for example. And this revised layout does benefit the conservation area through providing greater separation between buildings and reducing the pressure on the trees which are on the rear boundary, the western boundary of the site that members will have seen yesterday. The design of the dwellings has been improved as well during the course of the application by providing pitched roofs over the individual offshoot elements rather than having wider pitched roofs which spanned the pairs, and the design is considered acceptable, and the scale and appearance is similar to the detailed scheme which was previously approved for two of the dwellings on the site. A full soft landscaping scheme would be required by condition to supplement the retained trees and soften the impact of the built development, particularly by providing soft boundaries, softer than are shown on the current plans, where there is a lot of fencing proposed. In terms of highway safety and parking, the access would be taken off the existing access road down from the Causeway, which serves other properties in the area, and that was the approved access for the previous permissions for dwellings on the site. The Local Highways Authority has considered the application and the subsequent amendments to it, and does not object to the intensification of the use of that access as a result of the provision of 6 additional dwellings, provided that the junction with the Causeway is upgraded from a crossover to a Bellmouth junction. Waste collections would be from the Causeway, which the waste team informs me is the same arrangement as most of the existing dwellings that are served by the access at the moment. So people drag their bins down. And that would continue with this site as well. Acceptable parking and turning provision has been made on site. 2 car parking spaces provided per dwelling and 2 visitor spaces as well, which accords with the council's adopted parking standards, and there would be cycle parking provided in the sheds to the rear. And all of those provisions, including the scheme for upgrading the Bellmouth junction on the Causeway, would be secured by condition. In terms of ecology, the site is former garden land and is currently kind of grassed with some trees, hedge planting to the rear, and an area of bramble and scrub on site. Much of the existing planting in the centre of the site would be cleared, with trees and hedges to the rear of the site being retained and supplemented. The ecological appraisal for the site includes recommendations for mitigation and compensation for the loss of habitat, as well as an enhancement scheme. We did consult the Wildlife Trust on that submission, and the Wildlife Trust is content with the ecological impact in terms of that adequate mitigation can be made, and enhancement as well, and that would be secured by condition. Some concern was raised locally regarding garden ponds, which were not identified in the ecological assessment that was provided. The applicant's ecologist later tried to gain access to some properties to survey those ponds. They weren't successful in surveying all of them, but they have since entered into a district level licensing scheme agreement to provide contributions for compensatory off-site habitat in order to compensate for the potential loss of great crested newt habitat on site, which was the concern given that those ponds had not been identified. The site's within flood zone 1 and within development envelope, and surface water is proposed to be dealt with on site via soakaways and permeable surfacing. And foul water would be connected to the main sewer. One of the neighbours to the site has expressed concern regarding the impact of the development on their drinking water borehole. However, there's no obvious impediment to the provision of adequate drainage on site. There's no reason why surface water couldn't be managed through soakaway or other means on site. And with the connection of the foul water to the mains, it's not considered that there would be any significant impact on the borehole supply. And as with previous permissions on the site, the detailed drainage schemes would come forward under the requirements of conditions that we would apply to the scheme. So in summary, the development is within the Burwell development envelope where residential use is acceptable in principle. There are previous permissions on the site for a total of 6 dwellings. We consider that the scheme has an acceptable impact on neighbouring amenity, visual amenity and the conservation area, highway safety, parking, ecology, flood risk and drainage. And we would propose conditions to secure the additional detailed information where that's necessary. And on that basis, we are recommending the application for approval.
Thank you very much indeed. We have an objector, Sarah Watts. Would you like to come up and speak, please? You have 5 minutes. Can you make sure the microphone's switched on and that you're fairly close to it? And yeah, little red light comes on. Okay, away you go.
Okay, good morning, Chair and members. I represent the unanimous objections from the Causeway residents, Newnham Lane and us at Poplars Close. We have also received full support from the Parish Council. This proposal is ill-fitting to the area, including its impact over our bungalows, even more so that we're on a downward slope and therefore giving an appearance over us of up to 10.5 metres high. They have not addressed the overbearing sense of enclosure. With the extra height and larger than average roof space, they are in fact just misinterpreted 3-storey houses and not 2-storey at all. And this would create a damaging sense of looming. There is no precedent for 3-storey properties of this scale in Burwell, let alone over bungalows, with good reason. Roof lights on the top floor state that they're 150 centimetres from the floor with no external view. This claim is vastly inaccurate considering the average height of any adult is above 5 feet, 150 centimetres. Those visiting yesterday were able to see the viewing ability from my own window on a lower storey at approximately the same height. Excuse me. Government publications on planning policy state that greater concentration will now be placed on the quality, design and environment in planning than ever before, with local community fully involved in how they want new developments to look and feel, the build back better. I offered to work alongside the planning officer and developers. However, on several occasions, I was ignored and I have continued to offer and still would. We have a right to not be watched or have a feeling of being watched and for it not to impinge on our amenities. The National Planning Policy Framework states that the new design should be appropriate to the surrounding pattern of development, should not destroy mature trees or as above impinge upon our amenities and privacy. This is also replicated in the Human Right to Privacy Act of 1998, respect to your private and family life. Trees that the arboriculture report state were in poor condition and were set for removal are now the ones stated to act as our only form of screening, most of which are deciduous. As members of the committee will have seen yesterday on the site visit, some of them are pulling up the pavement with quite considerable damage. That's on the photo of the thing that I've included. Storm damage or any pruning or later removal of these trees would cause an alarming impact of intrusion to our amenities again. 4 neighbouring properties, including our own, and some on the Causeway, have had double subsidence issues, mostly due to trees, and this would be irresponsible to ignore this. A further planting scheme has not been included to shield the Causeway residents as well as us. the autumn months would leave the trees bare also. The digital plan provided, which I've shown on pages 1 and 2, over from the cover page, at every angle from every window of the development, we appear to be overlooked with no singular private space. I also informed the planning officer of inaccuracies of the biodiversity report, including owls nesting in the trees, a water vole nesting in our garden, newts, which I included photographic evidence of, bat boxes on our wall, and a 42 square metre pond stocked with frogs nesting ducks and the newts next to the conservation area. Despite him visiting and seeing these, this information was never published. In turn, I declined a visit from the company named Green Light to prove otherwise, considering this evidence had already been shown. Pictures on page 3 and 4 are an example of a development in Cambridge City. These houses have an identical size and scale and a similar distance dimension. The Causeway properties and our neighbouring bungalow are even closer than the distances. These were approved, but are now earmarked as a damaging precedent of how planning developments can go very, very wrong. The City Council were held liable for catastrophic efforts and made to pay the largest sum of compensation in their history, whilst the CEO, external investigators, solicitors and ombudsman were all informed. MPs were all involved and it cost the council several thousands. Whilst I appreciate that every application runs on its own merit, I do believe that the policy frameworks are key to planning decisions wherever they are, and we are most certainly not in a city. So I'd urge you all to take note of their striking similarities and not bring this gross mistake to a village context. On paper, this plan is filled with inaccuracies that do not meet the final design guide. When put into practice, it's overbearing, intrusive and overdevelopment. We are not averse to a more appropriate design and are aware of the need for houses, despite that 350 houses have already been granted in the village. A bungalow or chalet design would fit and support the growth of Burwell whilst blending with the street scene without causing major disruption to the residents. The committee can best serve the community of Burwell by rejecting this application altogether and preventing urban small sprawl within a village. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, questions for the local resident? Councillor Trapp.
Thank you for your presentation and your photographs.
Thank you.
Would you consider that a 2-story house would be more appropriate?
I have considered it, and as you know, you were one of the visitors yesterday. I was always happy to work with the developers, and that was a suggestion I made. So in my objections in June of 21, I did actually write that I was the one who suggested flipping these plans around because originally they were facing right into us. So the planning officer came on site with me and we discussed that, but then he ignored my request to take it from 3 stories. So yes, a 2-story within reason, and I still think a strategic placing of those windows, then yeah, it would be something that we would consider. It's the feeling of being loomed over and still the planting. I think the planting plays a key part in where we feel we sit as bungalows on a slope.
Can I just follow that up? It looked to me when we were site visiting there that the rest of the houses around there were much lower, or of 2 stories rather than 3 stories. So this would be quite an intrusion.
Yeah. So I think they used an example of like a small attic conversion in one of the Lays properties as though that's 3 stories, but it's still a 2-story elevation. And like I said in here, they're saying that there's extra height. Over 9.2 meters is really quite enormous. And that's why I've used the pictures of the city planning to show you. They really are a very similar dimension, and they cause that massive looming impact that it just doesn't fit within a village context at all. They're not high-rise buildings. We don't have that in a village.
Can I ask you just to answer the question?
Sorry,
Yes,
yeah.
I know you're wound up, whatever.
Nerves and passion.
Now, Councillor Edwards.
Following on from the site visit yesterday and seeing your photograph of the damage that the trees are actually causing to the footpath along the Lays, is it your fear that at some stage this hedging will be removed?
Yeah, for sure.
And then you will be totally overlooked?
Well, so in the arboriculture report, that one was set for removal. So as were most of them. They literally decided that all of those were set for removal, and they were worthless trees, but now they're set to be our screening. So which is it? It's like, you know, if you change your mind, you can't, you know, like, I just think it has to have some consistency as to what those value of those trees are, and half of which they're deciduous, so they wouldn't serve a screening purpose anyway. So yeah, without that, and the evergreen, I spoke to Kevin Drain, the officer, who said that that tree is still quite young and has a long way to grow. As we know with Leylanda, it would just grow up as a trunk, so it wouldn't have any greenery attached to the bottom half of it anyway.
Hello, I think we're having a risk of getting out of hand. There's a gentleman at the back who keeps waving his hands, and it's totally out, not a speaking opportunity. But since you're so waving your hands, is there anything that it's... So you're the applicant?
Chair, that's the applicant's agent, who didn't register to speak, but he's prepared to answer members' questions if members have got anything that they think
Okay, well, I
specifically he would
think
need to answer.
we will, are there any more questions for Sarah Watts? Okay, thank you. And exceptionally, you have the applicant here. Are there any members who wish to question the applicant? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we've just heard.
Yeah, well, you should really come up if you're going to come up. But okay, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we've just heard some of the local residents' concerns about the height of it. Was any consideration given to two-storey ones?
Yes. No, you've got to have the light on.
Yeah. There was consideration given to 2 stories, but there is some slight inaccuracies in the talk which has just been the presentation. There are a number of converted properties down there on the leads which are actually 3-storey. The loft areas have been converted. The windows on these, which are 2.5-storey, are located at 1500i, which are on a roof plane dimension, not a dimension of standing high. But the roof windows are located high, so they can't be physically seen out of. They're there purely for ventilation purposes. They're not there for visually looking out of. These are starter home bases. They're starter home.
A general description. I've made the exception in case members have questions. Councillor Jones had a question. Have you been answered, Councillor Jones?
Yes, I think so.
Councillor Downey.
Thank you. I was just going to ask about the trees. The trees have been raised as an issue, whether the ones that are there that are going to be remaining there and giving screening have any value, or whether they're likely to be removed. That was something the objector raised. Do you have any comment on that?
No, as Dan Smith has already commented on, a number of those trees are actually remaining. There is no intention of removing them. And the more that can be kept, they will be kept. And I think that's shown actually on the site plan that's been produced.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
If you've no objection to the trees being removed, you don't think they will be removed. How about, have you thought about asking for a TPO on those trees so they can't be removed without planning permission? If they're
I don't think the
essential to the design of the properties.
I don't think the trees are of any significant importance. They're not oaks of any kind. We've got no intention of removing them. They're having no impact on the actual development as it is. So we've got every intention of retaining them on the site.
Unless there's something really vital that another member wants to say? Yes, for the minutes, can we have your name, please, sir?
David Taylor.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
No problem.
Okay, we've got the Parish Council and we've got Leah Dodds. You've got 5 minutes, sir. And can you make sure you turn the microphone on?
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, excellent. So I'm Lee Dodds and good morning, everyone. And I'm here to speak on behalf of Burwell Parish Council, who oppose this application. I've got 3 areas to cover and they all concern safety. There's the safety of the access to the development, the safety and maintenance of the Leys track, and lastly, safety at the junction with the Causeway. So first, we're concerned about the lack of safe access. In the planning team leader's briefing to the committee in the document, reference is made to previous permissions being the basis for the acceptability of the access arrangements. However, the revised plans include new and problematic features. Specifically, there's an 8-metre by 8-metre turning head, which wasn't there before. And this is at the entry point to the proposed development. But as you will have seen on the site visit, that end of the Leys track is used and has been used for decades by the residents of the terraced houses nearby to park their vehicles, typically 4 or 5 cars. They don't have a nearby alternative. That is where they park. Now the track is unadopted and it's unowned. So in fact, the residents don't have a legal right to park there, they just do it. But neither does the applicant have the right to presume that part of that land is available for the 8-metre turning. They don't own the land and they can't control the parking that will happen there. Now, a parking free-for-all is nothing new, but at this location, it's completely unacceptable. The plans show lorries reversing at a point where the track tapers, and eventually it tapers to just 3.6 metres across. And there's nothing to prevent a lorry driver unwittingly swinging the back of their vehicle over the whole of the adjacent public footpath. And that danger is compounded by the complete absence of street lighting and the inevitable presence of parked cars in and around the turning area. That public footpath is a popular route for parents taking children to school and to the local nursery, and there would be no easy escape from a reversing vehicle. The other side of the footpath is a high brick wall from the outhouses. The second issue regarding safety is actually a request for Highways to secure a lasting solution to the safety and condition of the track. The application proposes a permeable tarmac surface for the track, but that means very little without a plan to maintain it. If a tarmac surface is needed now, it's needed in the future too. And whatever that surface, the concrete public footpath that runs alongside the track will need to be clearly defined and protected. At present, cars and lorries make free use of the footpath, which damages it and endangers pedestrians. And given the increased traffic flows, which will come to the new development, and the many safety problems to be solved, we request that the approval be made, if approval is given, it be made conditional on the track and the road junction being brought up to the standard required for adoption by Highways, including drainage, pavement and lighting. And that would provide a joined up solution to a very messy set of problems which all hinge around pedestrian safety. And finally, there's the highway safety at the junction with the Causeway. And I think there is a confounding factor here that the upgrade to a bell mouth could very easily worsen rather than improve safety. At present, motorists approaching that junction are confused. They don't know what it is and they slow down. If it looks like a familiar junction, they will come at their usual speeds, which will be quicker. And this is a concern because the Causeway is part of National Cycle Route 51. and it's a popular and busy, safe route to the local school. In the spirit of the recent changes to the highway code, the Parish Council would like to see pedestrians and cyclists given priority over cars and lorries if consent is granted. And for that, an example of this would be a raised table, so that as the cars approach, they would bump up, go over the table and then bump down to alert them to the fact that this is a thoroughfare for pedestrians principally, and also that they'll be entering an unregulated highway, not a highway, an unadopted road area. So that concludes my comments. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for practicing and getting your timing right. Members, questions? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So you talked about the easement or access rights to the land. Is it owned by anybody? Do you know who owns it?
No, people have tried hard to identify it, because then pressure could be brought to have the condition improved and have it made safe. But no, there's no evidence of it ever having been owned.
Right. And it's public right of way as such.
There's a right of way, yes, certainly on the public footpath and by usage on the track.
Okay. I can't even make a note of my thing right raised table. So you don't know if there's easement rights. That was all right. Okay, that was fine. And your safety concerns were purely about during the construction phase when you're talking about the lorries.
It's not safe at the moment. So but with the increased traffic that another 6 dwellings, potentially 12 cars, and all the courier vehicles and the usual traffic that comes down, it will worsen the situation.
Okay, thank you. And we have Councillor Trapp.
Thank you. I was at that site yesterday, and I did notice that the access to it is quite limited. And I think any lorry going down that road with the cars parked on one side would be going over the footpath. Is that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sorry. Any lorries going down that track with cars parked to the one side would be actually going on the footpath as well.
That's very commonly the case, and it happens currently with all sorts of lorries going down, be it a large one with a skip, say, for a resident there, or the smaller delivery vehicles. They all struggle, and they reverse in a totally uncontrolled way. It's not safe. And it will worsen, particularly worsen if, because of the proposed access arrangements, creating this turning circle in a no man's land.
It could be that the turning could actually be on site, provided the car parking, and I'm just looking at, if the whole thing was opened up, you could actually turn around probably in the site itself, between the house and the, but that's another matter.
If I may make a comment on that, I think that's correct.
If you can be yes or no.
Sure. I think that's correct in principle, but in the real world, you will have all the residents there looking for somewhere to park, because that's where they're used to doing it, and they need to be near their houses. So you'll have congestion and difficulty, I think, with access, whatever arrangements are made. But this turning head is particularly problematic.
Councillor Jones, I've got you down as a second.
Thank you, Chair. Just confirming, obviously looking at the map and things like that, this looks to be the gardens of the properties, the way the lines are extended, has been sold off. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And the properties that you're talking about with the for parking, are you talking about the properties from 75 to 91, or are you talking from the other side? No, I know there's probably a little bit. I know there's a shop on the corner and things like that when I visited, sort of a.
No, these are the people who live exactly in that area. So it's the terrace which faces onto the Leys footpath, which is running along the west boundary.
Back, right, yeah. Sorry,
Have we got any more questions for the Parish Council? Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, sir.
Thank you.
Your microphone is still on. Thank you. Okay, officer comments. Anything you want to say?
I don't know if members have got any questions, Chair. I don't know. I mean, I can comment on things that have been raised, but I don't know if you want members to direct questions. I'm happy to answer.
No, members will have a chance to question you.
Right.
It's
There's not. I don't think there's anything particular that I want to add. I think the, as I said, this in terms of neighbour impact, separation distances are what I've given in my report. We're content that they're adequate. They are in excess of what we would require in the design guidance. I mean, I think there is an element of consideration of the fact that the land levels do change. So the bungalows are on lower land, but even in that case, there's, in terms of our design guide, the excess is such that I think that accounts for that impact. So that's why we're content. I don't think we are of the view that the screen planting necessarily is critical because of that separation in any case. But as the applicant's agent has said, they are intending to retain it. So that those would be my comments on the matters that have been raised.
okay, thank you very much indeed. Members, have you got questions for the officer? Looks we've got Councillor Wilson by a short head, and then Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Do you regard the design of these semi-detached houses to be of exceptionally good quality? Because and particularly brilliant to me, and of course it's in the conservation area, and the fact that they're so tall, they need to be particularly well designed, don't they? Isn't that one of the rules for a conservation area?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, yeah, I think we're content with the design in terms of them being good quality. As I said, there have been there's been a minor change to the design during the course of the application, which was to get the roofs over the rear sort of two-storey projected elements changed so that they are narrower in span and they don't span the whole. I mean, I try and bring up the elevations. So at the bottom there, you see the rear offshoots. They were originally proposed to be covered by on each pair a single dual pitch roof, and that was something that the conservation officer requested be changed. And so, yeah, I think the conservation officer is content with the design of the properties. They're similar in scale, and I would say a slightly improved design to the detailed pair that we'd approved on site previously. So yes, we are content with the quality of the design.
Okay, Councillor. So Councillor Ambrose Smith.
I think perhaps you've already answered some of the questions. I live in a similar situation next to a tall Victorian village hall. So being, you know, I don't find it oppressive. I do have three traditional houses facing into the front of my property. Again, that is not a problem. I don't think that there's going to be any overlooking of bungalows or otherwise.
Councillor Ambrose Smith, could we keep them to questions, not?
Well, yes, I was.
Your opportunity to have a view will come out in the debate.
Well, I was going on to say the officer is quite confident that the windows on the third storey, unless, you know, are perfectly adequate for this type of location and design.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, in terms of the roof windows that you can see again on the street view facing Poplars Close there, they're approximately 23 metres from the rear boundary of the site. You've then got about 2 metres of footpath, and then the garden boundary of the neighbouring properties. So from our point of view, yes, that is an adequate separation distance. They also serve, I mean, they do serve on the back, they do serve bathrooms in any case. So yes, we're satisfied. I wouldn't take issue with the fact that as a neighbour, you will undoubtedly be concerned about overlooking, particularly because you live in a bungalow that isn't currently overlooked. But from our point of view, in terms of design guidance, getting to a point where we're satisfied that there isn't a significant impact from overlooking, yes, we're satisfied.
I hope that's okay.
Could I just come back with a quick one? The lady, the resident, said that she would consider a traditional two-storey house to be probably acceptable. So the windows that you've got here are in effect no worse than a two-storey house.
I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of the neighbour. I would say that roughly speaking, that the heights of those windows, the first floor windows, yes, they're broadly what I would expect in a two-storey dwelling. And then obviously you've got the roof windows above to provide the second floor accommodation.
Could we please have some order here, please?
Okay, I'm fine.
Okay. We've got Councillor Jones with a possibility of a question to the officer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of my concerns was, obviously, we've seen a certain amount of creep from 2 dwellings to 4 dwellings and now to 6. I mean, do we feel there's a chance of it being slightly overdeveloped?
Thank you, Councillor. Just to explain the planning history in a bit more detail, there was, let me bring up, it might be easiest if I try and explain on here. So the sort of southernmost pair that you see there, let me get my pointer. This area of land here was at first given permission for, outline permission for 2 houses, and then a detailed reserve matter scheme was submitted for those. And then this area of land to the north, sort of the balance of what is now the site, was given an outline permission for. So that's the 6 that we've got. So it's broadly speaking, same site area and the same number, although the layout is different from what was approved in detail on the lower portion of the site. We never got a reserved matters application in for the balance of the site, so it's only ever been an outline on that part of the site.
We are trying to make this a matter of question and answer, if you can, to the officers. Councillor Wilson.
Were opaque windows for the roof lights considered?
Yes, we considered whether they were necessary. In our view, they're not necessary. As I said, that particularly the ones to the rear, which would serve bathrooms. I mean, they may be obscured. If members felt that was something that was essential, that could obviously be considered. Given the separation distances, we didn't feel that was necessary, and so obviously, in terms of justifying requirements and conditions, we need to be satisfied that it's reasonable and necessary to make the development acceptable. So we don't, but if members feel like they do need to be obscurely glazed, I'm not sure that would, it certainly wouldn't be something that concerned me, because they serve bathrooms and therefore one might expect them to be obscurely glazed in some circumstances anyway.
Is it okay? And I believe we have Councillor Trapp.
Yes. First,
Councillor Downing.
what is that dotted line going down, or the dashed line going down the middle? I can't, my eyesight isn't good enough to see.
So that's that's an indicative line of a foul main that is across the site at present,
Okay,
which would have to be diverted in order to accommodate the development.
And that would be diverted where? You don't know.
Yeah, that would be a matter for the water board by agreement.
The other thing is, yesterday we talked about it. It is in the conservation area, this, isn't it? So that any trees there would need permission to be removed? Or
Trees over a certain size, yes, are kind of benefit from a level of protection because you need to seek permission to remove them.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Trapp.
It's all right, we're very similar.
I get so used to saying councillor trap. I get shocked when it's councillor
It's
down.
quite understandable, we look so similar. Thank you, yeah, can I just ask, sort of following on from councillor Jones's question, what the density is on the site compared to other sort of surrounding areas?
I don't actually have a comparative figure, unfortunately, councillor Downey. I would say, broadly speaking, the widths of the property are roughly similar to the other terraces in the locality. They are a bit taller, as I've said, than neighbouring properties around the site. But I haven't got a comparative density with what's adjacent. Although I would suggest it's probably similar, given that they're terraced houses, or they're pairs on this site and then terraces on the other. So if anything, probably maybe slightly lower density on this site.
Thank you very much. Okay, I am trying to push things along a bit, and I would ask members to be conscious of the fact that when it's a straight question, is this the case? Yes. Is this the case? No, rather than a general dialogue, if we could. Have you any more questions for the officer? Yes, councillor Jones, I think it's your turn.
Right, thank you, Chair. Referring back to the gentleman's concerns about the junction mouth, given that there's no definitive ownership of the land, are we able to enforce things like bell mouth construction?
Yeah, so the Bellmouth construction would take place within the adopted highway, which on the layout plan you can see over on the sort of far right hand side. So that's where the highways improvements would take place, and the Highways Authority is satisfied that they can be accommodated there, and that would come forward both via the condition that we've applied to the permission, and also as part of a highways agreement that they would want to or insist on securing ahead of any works in the highway.
Okay, members, we now move on to the debate. Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll kick off. As we know, it's always going to be a judgment call between an officer opinion, whether an impact is acceptable, and my opinion, if an impact is acceptable. And I would actually like to propose that we refuse the application on the grounds that the height of the proposed dwellings is overbearing and causes an unacceptable detrimental impact on the residential amenity of neighbouring property.
Thank you very much. Do you have a seconder there? Councillor Edwards, have you anything you want to add to the debate? Okay, we are in general debate. Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not in mind to approve this. My objections were the same as the Parish Council, effectively, and that was the access and turning areas. I really agreed with them 100% on what was actually said. A little problem with the house design, living, as my wife mentioned, which is in a bungalow, which is surrounded by tall buildings, looking in myself. But I do feel 6 houses in that particular area, and also with that access, is actually overdevelopment for that particular site.
I always have something to say, I think. I was rather struck by the comment by the agent that these were starter homes, and I looked at the plans, and there are 3 basically ensuite bedrooms. And I wasn't sure, a starter home to me would be 2 stories. So I think this is, and looking at the height and everything else, I think this is actually excessive. for this neighborhood. Very small houses around it, and I must say, I was actually in favor of the development until I heard some of the comments today, some of the arguments today, and I think on the whole, I think given what other people would say, I'd probably be opposing this development.
We visited the site about 1 o'clock on Monday afternoon. I think that this would actually be rather a nice hidden away development. I don't have a problem personally with it being 3 stories, and it is quite likely that one of the bedrooms on the top floor in this day and age would be used as working space, I would guess, for all or part of the week. I do think the chairman of the parish council did have some good ideas about the access and the road, the causeway. And I think if some things like that could be I don't know if you can insist on these things being done by highways. I suppose that's the nub of the question. Otherwise, I quite like the development. So that's my point. Thank you.
Okay, have we any other, Councillor Every?
Thank you, Chair. I visited on a Saturday afternoon, so it's quite interesting to see that we will have all, across our committee members, have seen this at different times. I'm actually in agreement with the proposal that we should actually refuse this. I agree with, I'm particularly interested in what the Parish Council has had to say. They've done a lot of work on this and they know the area better than anyone. It looks to me like overdevelopment, and I can understand the concerns that the local residents have about being overseen. So I won't be supporting you.
Thanks. Councillor Every, Councillor Downing.
Thank you. So I think there's something very interesting going on here with this proposal. As Councillor Trapp said, it's interesting that these have been referred to as starter homes when they are quite large homes. And I think what's interesting is that it's 6 quite large homes, and we actually see quite a lot of proposals come to this committee for 6, 7, 8 houses, and that's because if it's under 10, then there's no affordable housing requirement. Put simply, I think you could use this space much better to build. Actually, I mean, we can talk about whether it's overdevelopment or not. Evidently, it's, you know, it's the plot is the size that it is, but I think you could make an argument for building 10 houses there of a smaller, less impactful scale. And I think that that isn't the proposed development, because that would then come in with the 30% affordable housing requirement. I can't see the planning reasons to refuse it, which might be why no one's actually proposed a motion yet. I don't think they've just. Okay, I apologise. I apologise, I missed that. But I'm open-minded about how I'll vote, so I'll listen to what everyone else has to say. Thank you.
Okay, we have a proposal. The proposal is from Councillor Brown. It's seconded by Councillor Edwards. And can you be clear, Councillor Brown, your reasons for rejecting this?
Proposal be refused on the grounds.
Is there at this late stage some comment you look as though you're going to make, Christine? No? Okay, and that's seconded.
Just mentioned to me that there are also concerns about the access arrangement.
Yes, and I would add to that those concerns about construction traffic. Okay, so we have a proposal, proposed by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Edwards, that we refuse this application, and Caroline has got the reasons there. Would you just like to read them out so everybody's clear?
Okay, so the proposal is to refuse the application on the grounds that the height of the proposed dwellings would be overbearing and cause unacceptable detrimental impact on the residential amenity of the neighbouring properties, and due to concerns about the access arrangements.
I mentioned construction traffic.
Did the proposer in the seconder want to add
I
that?
did, is the proposer and the seconder prepared to accept a suggestion from me, which was concerns about the construction traffic? Okay.
Chair, could we just be specific about just when we're drafting the refusal reason, if we get to that point on highway safety, can we just be specific about what those concerns are around highway safety and access? That'd be useful. Thank you.
Would you like to clarify that, Councillor Brown?
Sorry.
So I suppose, sorry to interrupt you, I suppose what I'm saying is it the junction, the intersection with the causeway, is it conflict with the existing use of the access road? Is it the the turning area that's proposed actually within the site?
It's all three. The access off the causeway, the conflict, particularly with the public right of way, and the turning access area into the housing bit.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. We're about to vote, Councillor Chapp.
Right, okay. Do you want me to make a comment?
Well, if it's going to add to the debate.
We'll add to the debate. In fact, this thing about the construction traffic is really saying there's not going to be any construction there at all. No. So that is something by the side, I think one's got to put aside. But I think I'm much more concerned actually about the ownership of the land, of the road. No one seems to want to own it. I mean, can I claim it? But, you know, is it going to be surfaced? What's going to happen to it? It seems that seems something ought to be sorted out as well.
Councillor Brown, is the comment about?
I don't see that that's got anything to do with planning.
Okay, well, we can delete that.
Because that argument over the ownership of that has been going on ever since I moved.
So we can delete the construction traffic reason. Yes, Councillor Edwards? Yeah, okay. So now we're clear, are we? Yeah. Okay. Well, those in favour of Councillor Brown's proposal, seconded by Councillor Edwards, please raise their hands. Okay, will those against the proposal please raise their hands? And have we any abstentions?
The motion is passed with 8 votes in favour, 2 votes against and 1 abstention.
So that application has been declined. And if members of the public who are dealing with that would like to leave, they're entirely up to you, but you can stay if you wish. That's right.
Chairman, would it be possible to have a short comfort break? As you read
Well,
through us?
we are, but we're trying to finish at 12:30, and that's the reason I'm trying to get to agree. We can have a 2-minute comfort break if members want that, but literally comfort only. So starting, and if we can, remember what I've asked you. If you can ask a question and answer it with yes or no, it would be really great. Anyway, we've got the proposal. Tony.
Thank you, Chair. So item 7 is for a development of 4 dwellings. It is currently retrospective and it's land adjacent to 2B Moor Road in Fordham. So I just want to give you an update. Firstly, Fordham Parish Council comments have been circulated to members. And I should also point out that condition 9 should read plot 2, not plot 1. So this is the location plan. So you can see the site outlined in red, and to the south is the village of Fordham. This is an aerial location plan, so you can see it in its location. And this is the site layout. So you have 4 plots. You have plot 1 to the north, plot 2 to the south, and 3 to the south, and 4 to the west. And to the right-hand side, you can see there's a picture taken from Moor Road. Plans and elevations. Basically, all plots look the same. So plot 1 and 2 are similar in terms of they have a first floor window. However, plot 2 has rooms within that roof space, whereas plot 1 does not. Plots 3 and 4 also look the same, except plot 4 does not have a garage. And this is what the garages to plot 1, 2, and 3 look like. So the main considerations. So what I will do to discuss in the presentation is the principle of development and the comparisons with the extant approved scheme. Obviously, within the report, we have discussed visual amenity, highway safety, residential amenity, drainage and flood risk, ecology, and trees. So we know the principle of development has been granted with planning permission in 2020 for 19-00887, which was for the construction of 4 single-storey dwellings with garaging, parking, and associated site works. This was a phased development. So in terms of the differences between what was approved in 2020 and what we have in front of us today are the inclusion of porches. 3 carports are now garages. Plots 1 and 2 have a first floor window to the east facing elevation, which overlooks the fields on Moor Road. Plot 2 has the conversion of the first floor to a bedroom with ensuite and shower room and dressing room. Some of the plots, which is plots 1, 3, and 4, have put up outbuildings, and there have been some changes to boundary and landscaping treatments. So in terms of the difference, so as you can see on the 19 application, there was 2 roofs in this way. On the 21 application, we have an additional roof which provides the porch. So here you can see that in the 19 application, we had open carports. In the 21 application, we have garage doors on the front. So in 2019, we did not have windows on the eastern elevation to plots 1 and 2. In 2021, we have this additional window in the first floor elevation, as you can see here in photographic form. Plot 2 is the only plot that has accommodation within the roof space. So we have a bedroom which utilises this large window on the east facing elevation, a stairwell, changing area, and ensuite. So as I said, there are some outbuildings within the site. So we have a pergola, we have a greenhouse, and we have another pergola. Then on plot 3, we have a summer house and then a shed here. And in plot 4, we also have another shed. So what are the issues? Do the changes in front of you today to the development cause demonstrable harm? Are the changes significant to cause demonstrable harm? And submitted retrospectively does not constitute demonstrable harm. So in terms of my recommendation is to approve the application subject to conditions in the Appendix 1 and to the change to plot to condition 9 where it should read plot 2, not plot 1. Thank you, Chair.
You've got 5 minutes. You need to turn your microphone on.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, because of time constraints on public speaking, I'm speaking to you on behalf of myself and many other residents of Fordham. There is much anger and consternation within the village concerning this development. Fordham Parish Council have vehemently objected, giving concise reasons on why these variations should be refused, and 8 residents have also written in with their objections. Surely you cannot ignore the views of all these residents and the Parish Council. The developer was told that any deviations to the plans would be at his own risk and cost. Neighbouring properties and I alerted East Cowes District Council to the many variations, planning violations as they were being built. The porches and the windows in the side eaves, the velexes, the outbuildings and the garage. I know that this planning committee cannot make comments on this point, but my husband was actually subjected to verbal abuse and threatening behaviour from the builder when he took photos of these building variations. This was reported to the police, and if required, I will let you have the incident numbers. 19-00887 was granted approval in January 2020, and I was present at that meeting. However, the committee members and vice chair discussed and agreed that approval would be given, but conditions of build would be stipulated and minuted. These included no variations to the roof whatsoever, which includes velexes and windows. The carports were to be built as carports and not garages, and that no structures or buildings should be constructed in any of the gardens or properties. I believe I see many of the same faces who agreed and voted with these variations to be put in place or here again today. It would appear the only person who did not agree to the conditions was the builder, which I imagine was more of a financial motivation rather than an aesthetic one. Enforcement officers visited the site on a number of occasions, which involved discussions on what was submitted versus what has been built. The case officer sought plans 3 times and informed the builder he was continuing to build at his own risk. It finally took him over 2 years to provide the correct plans, showing the variations in July 2022, by which time the properties were then occupied. As you have seen, there are variations, and I'm not going to go over all of those again, but there was one which was changing to the landscaping and boundary treatment, and this has been refused our planning permission, and the gates and subsequent fencing is now subject to an enforcement notice. With regard to the points that Tony Hilton pointed out and the points that I have made, I will look to you all and ask for your support as the planning committee to use your integrity and honesty to refuse the above variations to the plans submitted. Myself and other concerned residents put it to you, members of this planning committee, that there will be many builders, developers and agents waiting for your decision. And if you approve this application, it will only open the doors for all conditions attached to planning approvals to be ignored in East Cambridgeshire, knowing that it has little or no power to enforce such conditions. Builders will simply build what they want with no recourse. No doubt the developer and the occupants will say they have spent money making these alterations. This was always at their own risk. I'm looking to you all to reiterate the decision you made back in January 2020. The builder profited from selling these properties in the expectations that the planning committee would simply roll over and agree with his changes. This is your opportunity to ensure the builders build what you have lawfully agreed and not what makes them the most profit. I am looking to you all to remember your deliberations 2 years ago and reiterate and refuse these amendments and serve enforcement notices to put these right. This development is a blot on the landscape, and I therefore ask the committee to refuse these variations in this application and to put right the wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for Fiona Regan? Away you go.
Thank you. I was unaware until you mentioned it, that this was the developer, not, I just thought it was individuals within that plot, within those, had sort of done these things. But it looks to me from what you say, the developer has actually intentionally changed the whole aspect of it.
That is
thinking
correct.
He or she can get away with it.
Yes, that is correct, Councillor Trapp, because the approval with the variations that was given here was that there was to be no variations. He actually built all those variations, and the enforcement officer went in and said, if you do it, it's at your own risk. But with the exception of the outbuildings, which were done by the residents who have since moved in, all the other alterations were carried out by the builder prior to selling.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. You probably have part answered it, actually. I was going to say, do you disagree with all variations equally? I mean, you said about the outbuildings and the sheds going on. Is there any scheme? I can understand perhaps windows and things like that being put in, which actually are a lot more significant and done at the building stage than a wooden shed that can be removed with little.
Of course, I think one of the issues that I struggle with is that if variations are approved at a planning meeting, and then the builder just goes ahead and builds what he wants, i.e. the velexes and the windows in the gable end, then that is completely against the variations, as are the porches. They were not on the original plans. The gates and the fencing were not on the original plans. So I think if you did it onto a scale, I think the ones I would really object to are the variations that the builder has done. If you look at it sympathetically to the residents who are now there, they were perhaps not aware that they weren't supposed to put outbuildings in. However, the developer knew that they were to be carports, not garages. There was no windows in the roofs. There was no velexes. He built them against your decision.
Councillor Ambrose Smith.
I have to say, I can't recall this. We drove down on Monday and I thought it looked a tidy, if somewhat frazzled appearance, but they looked to be pleasant houses. I'm slightly concerned that you said the garages were originally built without as carports and not garages, and that you couldn't put any other outbuildings. It just seems ludicrous to me. Where do you keep your bikes, your dog, your, I don't know, DIY kit? You have to keep them somewhere. So, you know, the fact that it's a garage, not a carport, do you find that particularly offensive?
It's not the fact whether it was a garage or a carport. It was all to do with the square footage of the plots. And if they turned the garages and put garage doors on, then it affected the square foot capacity and the building regulations, which it then meant the amount of square footage was the contribution to affordable housing. I think what I'm trying to stress to members here today is that, yes, I agree. I've got a shed. I put my garden implements in it. What I'm objecting to most vehemently is the fact that the builder knew that you had not approved these. And if you put it on a scale of 1 to 10, the shed is probably irrelevant. Someone has got to keep it. But the garage doors should not have been put on there. They should have been carports. That's what was agreed at this meeting. And also at this meeting, you said, and it was Councillor Schumann, who was vice chair, said that the condition of approval was that no windows or velexes were to be altered in the roof space, and the garages were to
If I could restrict you to just answering straight yes, no to Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Everything else, I really strongly object, yes.
So how would you have felt if the house was sold as built to the plans, and then the resident or the owner of that house thought, oh, actually, I want a couple of Velux windows, or I'd like a bit of a porch, and then they got planning permission, would you have been highly irritated at that?
I think it's not a case of being highly irritated. I think the fact I'm annoyed that the builder went against your variations and went and did it anyway. If the building was sold, it is down to the individual to then apply for planning permission to put that in. It is the fact that the builder basically ignored what you all agreed and did what he wanted to do. I have no objection to what the residents now want to do with their houses. Yeah, I'm just trying to reply.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Is that okay?
I agree with you actually, but
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Thank you, Chairman. We are writing this email as residents of 5 Arthur's Way, Fordham. We would like to share in support of this application. As residents of the development for over a year and previously as residents of the village and surrounding areas, we chose this development because of its location, quality of build and design, which has taken into account the preservation of its local surroundings with a low profile roof space and traditional brick and flint finish. We are a young, growing family with plans to stay in our home for longevity, hence the need for our upstairs living space. Since living in our home, we have applied a privacy film to the upstairs gable end window following complaints of being able to see into this living space. We have also invested heavily into our garden space to ensure additional privacy to our neighbours and walkers and to be considerate of the local wildlife. We look forward to the apprehension of ongoing disputes coming to a close so that we can move on and enjoy our home in peace.
Thank you very much. You've also got a statement from the Parish Council.
With regard to this application, Fordham Parish Council originally approved the plans on the grounds of affordable housing being available in the form of 4 two-bed bungalows. The site is very far removed from the original plan and has in no way given the village the affordable housing it requires. It would appear that the applicant has blatantly disregarded the views of the residents, Parish Council and indeed East Cam's planning in what has now been built on the site, as it does not resemble the original application at all. As a Parish Council, we feel that we have been completely ignored in our efforts to keep the site to its original design and would urge the Planning Department to restore the site to follow the original application. Fordham Parish Council is also very concerned that if this development is allowed to stand, it makes a mockery of the whole planning process, which others might be tempted to follow. Having seen this developer apparently get away with it, others might be encouraged to flout the views of the council and local parishioners, and this development could set a dangerous precedent in our village, which has blatantly disregarded the basis on which the planning permission was granted. We have the following statement, which we now attach to all planning applications, and would ask that no further damage be done to the landscape and wildlife in the area covered under this application. Fordham Parish Council expect all applicants or their representatives to have familiarised themselves with the East Cambs District Council website. This includes having a full understanding of trees, hedgerows and wildlife. This can be found under the website, on the website under P for planning. One of the Parish Council's values is biodiversity. We uphold this value very seriously. The precious but limited land we have should be preserved and protected for future generations, including the wildlife that lives within it. As a Parish Council, we want to support local enterprise and development, but by not respecting our values or complying with our values may result in a fine by ECDC or a referral to the Cambridgeshire Police Force. Please support us to support you.
Well, thank you very much for that. We have now Ward Councillor Huffer. I think you know where to sit.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee for allowing me to address you today. I'm sure many, if not all of you, have developments on your wards that when mentioned to you by residents make your heart sink. This is one of those developments. Long before planning permission was eventually given, this site was a thorn in the side of the Parish Council and neighbouring properties. But frankly, had the properties been built as submitted and permissioned, we wouldn't be here today. However, the applicant has no regard for planning permissions or planning conditions. He believes that it is his right to build what he wants, where he wants, and when he wants. I know this because he told me so in a heated exchange in April 21, when I challenged him over the breaking of planning conditions by working on site at 3:30 on a Saturday afternoon. He firmly believes he can do whatever he wants, and I quote, "There is nothing you or East Cambs can do to stop me." This exchange took place shortly after I had visited the site with the enforcement officer following concerns that in breach of planning conditions, the applicant was building rooms in the roof space, something which Councillor Schumann had expressly conditioned against when the original planning permission was granted. We were shown around the property. Mr. Nash went to great lengths to show us there was no staircase leading to the attic area, and the very large window was to admit light into the roof space only. What I didn't know then, but I know now, was the applicant was intending to put the staircase off the living room. Within a matter of weeks, on my daily dog walk past the property, I saw plasterboard and lights being fitted. Not long after that, the new occupants installed their bedroom. Conditions 17 and 18 and 19 of this application all refer to the ENV2 of the 2015 local plan. ENV2 explains these policies are in place to safeguard the character and appearance of the village. Please remember this is a site that is in open countryside and on the edge of the village. Condition 17, the variations to the roof with the large windows to plots 1 and 2 on the eastern gable ends and the construction of habitable rooms into the roof intrude into the open countryside and spoil the character and appearance of the area. Condition 18, the close boarded fence at 2 meters high with concrete posts are oppressive and industrial, and again, does not safeguard the character and appearance of the area. Condition 19, this was very clear that the carports to plots 1 and 2 shall remain as carports in perpetuity, and this should remain in place. The issue here is that I have sat on this committee and I watched us all ask for conditions to be attached to planning permissions in the belief that they would be respected and adhered to. It would seem, frankly, if we don't make a stand today, we're wasting our time because certain applicants totally disregard what are reasonable and justified conditions put on to preserve the integrity of the surroundings and the area of the development. In this case, there has been a deliberate attempt to undermine the planning process. The applicant looked at the conditions attached and decided he would ignore them and build what he wanted and negotiate with the planning officer until he got what he wanted. Can I ask this committee to send a clear message to anyone who is intending to manipulate a planning approval or carry out unapproved works and then submit retrospective planning applications on the assumption that they will be approved? I'm asking you to refuse this application on the grounds of harm under ENV2. And I'm going to go further. I'm going to ask you to issue a breach of condition notice in this case, citing breaches of conditions 17, 18, and 19. You may not know this, but there is no appeal to a breach of condition notice. He can't go to the planning inspectorate, which is his normal go-to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Members of the committee, have you any questions for Councillor Hartfeld? No? Well, yes.
I'm intrigued. I agree that moving away from what was approved is unacceptable, but I wonder why work wasn't stopped. Do we not have the power to do that?
Apparently, the applicant knows his way around planning law. He would automatically say, I will be putting in an application for this work. I'll be putting in an application work. But Tony has worked so hard, as has the agent, to try and get plans out of this particular individual. I was told of a conversation when the builders were asked, or the chaps working on the site were asked, well, what plans are you working to? He said, we're not. He just tells us what we want, what he wants doing. So he builds it. He says, I can turn a 4-bedroom bungalow into a 5-bedroom bungalow. I can make an extra £150,000. That's what I'm going to do. I don't give a hang. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's just, sorry, Chair, but it's so frustrating because I've sat here and we've put conditions on, and why are we bothering? Let people just build what they want and come in for planning permission. That's basically what we're saying.
Thank you, Chair. I think in terms of, obviously, you haven't had your debate yet. Depending on how you go, if you were to go with a refusal, then we would have to go down the enforcement route. But it wouldn't necessarily be for a breach of condition, it would be in refusing this application. So if we were to refuse, yes. But it wouldn't be through the breach of condition, it would be through the refusal of the application.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, why? Why would it be for this application and not the breach of conditions?
Because we're dealing with the variation, so this is the application in front of us. So we would have to do the enforcement on this application, not on the previous application, because this is the application we are dealing with.
Oh, sorry, but he did breach the condition, but so are we just not enforcing that?
Yeah. Again, I'm not as detailed as Tony and the enforcement team will be. We could enforce on the breach condition because the developer hasn't complied with certain conditions. But just to cover what Councillor Huff said, obviously, when we refuse this application, if members were to go down that route, might not do, they would appeal that planning decision. So if the inspector then allowed that decision, then the enforcement notice would obviously have no weight, because obviously it would be acceptable, and therefore you can't enforce against something that is acceptable. But what we need to, if you were to refuse, what we need to know is, members, do you want us to enforce? And we would be saying, if you're refusing this application, we should enforce against it.
One other thing, sorry. And so why, I can't quite gather why we're recommended to approve this.
So obviously, you've read the report, and in determining an application, regardless that it's retrospective, and I know the residents, even myself, have been frustrated with the situation we find ourselves in. We, as a planning officer, as myself, I have to determine whether what's in front of me or what's being proposed or what is there is actually causing demonstrable harm. And that's what I went through in the presentation. The changes from what was approved to what is in place, when it's looked at as a package, it is not considered to cause demonstrable harm.
Sorry to keep you waiting. I was trying to make some notes. Councillor Every.
I just wanted, thank you, Chair. Just wanted a bit of clarification, because I can understand the angst of everybody that's in this room, and I particularly felt for the residents of these buildings, young families who are possibly, and I'm not quite sure, you could perhaps explain, so that if we were to turn this over, what is the procedure if one goes down enforcement for the residents of those houses who have bought them in good faith? Did I get the right, understand the right response that Andrew made was that if this was to go to appeal on refusal of what you've stated, that it could be overturned because it is not detrimental harm. I totally accept all that everybody says about the builder and what they've done, but I'm just trying to look at the practicalities of what we're going to have to deal with.
Would you like me to respond? So, thank you, Councillor. In terms of procedure, we would probably, that is something we have briefly discussed with the enforcement officer. It was likely that we would be taking enforcement action against the individual owners of the property. Yes. And with regard to I can't remember what the second question was now, I do apologise. So in terms of overturning, they would have the opportunity to appeal.
David was before me, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Tony, if we are in mind to approve this application, could we then fine the developer, say £50,000 for breach of condition? Because I am worried about, as Councillor Everett said, practicalities of all of this, because we do have the residents actually in place at the present moment, and their quality of life for a period of time will be disrupted. But this, could we do that? Could we approve, then fine them for breach of condition? Could we work hard on that, please?
I wish I could say maybe yes or maybe no. Unfortunately, that is not within the remit of the planning system. So that is not something we could undertake.
Okay, we have Christine Ambrose.
Is it not
Mr.
possible?
Strapp, you are on our list.
Is it not possible to revoke our planning permission? That would make the properties unmortgageable, presumably. But on the other hand, we gave, sorry, my mind, I can't think of the right word. We gave conditions that were actually a bit pointless. And I'm particularly thinking about the carport shed thing. I mean, that is clearly ludicrous. If you can't have somewhere where you can lock to keep things that you don't want in the house up, then that's a pretty awful situation. But on the other hand, this man has driven a cart and horses through the whole process. Whether some of the owners were involved in the decisions, you know, to put the stairs in and whatnot, I don't know, and who can say. But can we not revoke the planning permission so that it has to all be revisited? But then if we revisit it and refuse it, where the hell do we go then?
Yeah, I'll look to Maggie as well, but to revoke, you can revoke planning permissions, but they're extremely difficult, and the council would have to give compensation, as I understand it, to the cost of those houses, because obviously it is a permission granted. Just to also cover, because I think you were moving into it, removal of PD rights, which is obviously what a lot of the conditions we have, doesn't mean you can never build like a garden shed. It just means you've got to come to us for permission for that shed. It's not that you'll never get a garden shed in that garden, it's just we control it. And then what we'll be looking at that time, which is kind of what we're doing now, does it harm residential community? Does it harm the character of the area? And that's the harm we have to determine an application on.
Trap.
Thank you. Tony, you mentioned demonstrable harm, no demonstrable, but there is demonstrable harm. First of all, to the residents of Fordham. The parish council has clearly said what is not acceptable. It's also demonstrable harm actually to the power and authority of this planning committee. And I think this is quite blatant what has happened. And obviously it was pushed through. Sorry, I'll reserve that to my speech, all right. But the demonstrable harm is not just to the immediate neighbours, but also to the whole community.
Again, it comes back to, I really do understand what has happened to the residents in Fordham, and councillor Huffer will back me up that we've had many conversations about this. And I do understand, but I have to look at it from a planning point of view and looking at planning policy. And there's no room for a policy that says because something is retrospective and that the developer may, or, you know, I have to be very careful how I phrase this, may or may not have behaved, is not a reason to refuse an application. But I do understand everybody's concerns in that respect.
I almost agree word for word with councillor Trapp in that I just wrote down here, lack of compliance means demonstrable harm to the whole of East Camps. And I'm not so sure that that isn't the case. If we could take a slightly broader view than just Fordham, you know, I think, you know, where do we go if we give permission and it's just ignored? And I think we're looking for you to guide us, but we'll continue the debate. Anyone registered to speak? No, there's not. So oh yes, there is. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions, if I may. One, you didn't give your opinion on the likelihood of the decision being overturned if we refused it. Would you hazard a guess? Do you think it feels more likely than?
What if we were to refuse it? Go to appeal.
To appeal, do you think we would be overturned?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I can never stand in it. Yeah.
My second question is, and Councillor Huffer alluded to it, that obviously when the carports were built as carports rather than garages, it was to defeat ground space and reduce sort of 106 payments to affordable housing and things like that. Is that the case? Is that?
There has been a slight change in thoughts, or in the MPPF, it was made that if development was over 1,000 square metres or over a hectare, then we would need to secure affordable housing. And at that point, the development, if the carports had been garages, it would have been over 1,000 square metres. However, there is a change in discussions with the housing officers at more recently, is that the MPPF does not actually make that equivocal to 4 dwellings. It's when it's over 10 dwellings, not on floor space.
I just want to see if there was any recourse.
Councillor Wilson.
Is the fact that they've put a room above and with a window and a room in it, doesn't that increase the floor space of the actual building itself, and therefore would not increase the sill that would have to be paid for?
Yes.
So are we going to add some sill on this? If we approve this, do we get some extra sill?
That is attached as an informative, and that is done through another department in the local authority. But yes, that would be applicable.
We're still on questions to the officer. Councillor Trapp.
Yeah, just interested about this thing. When this was actually put forward, the whole thing was that if the garages were garages and not carports, they would have to have affordable housing. And I think it's something like Councillor Huffer mentioned, this was originally meant to be affordable housing anyway. So I looked at it and I don't think that's affordable housing. So, you know, we're really sort of playing the game here, actually.
The schemes that I have dealt with have never been for affordable housing. And in the report, it clearly states that the housing officer who looked at the scheme said it does not meet the criteria for an affordable house, for affordable housing.
Right. Thank you.
Any more questions from the officer? Well, we now move on. Thank you. We now move on to a general debate, and we may well come back to you later, I think.
Thank you, Chair. I feel like everybody else that, we've been taken advantage of here, really. The fact that the officer has suggested that likelihood it will be overturned means that we would be liable for costs if we fight it. Something we need to bear in mind. I'm not sure that, if we try to fire a warning shot, that it's really going to be successful in this case. So while reluctantly, I have to, I feel like I'm agreeing with the officer's decision in this particular case, however much I want to disagree with it. And as all we can do is just have a look and see what costs we can reclaim against additional, sill and things like that.
This builder has had no regard to good practice. Can we not have a blacklist where we won't in future accept planning applications in his name, but that he'll just do it in someone else's name?
I don't think that's within the realms of a planning committee to have a blacklist.
Or his work is no longer to be inspected by building control people. I mean,
I go back to the officers. I can't believe that falls within our remit at all.
No, sorry.
I believe I had someone else who wanted to speak, but there are some more down here. Councillor Brown and Downey and that.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd echo what Councillor Jones just said, really. I mean, it stinks, but as Councillor Every asked the question, what are we doing to the people who've bought those properties and now living in them and now making them their home? I wish it had been stopped before they'd been sold. I think that would have been the best time to have done something about it. We could have made it and take them down then, but I can't see that we can make them totally turn over their lifestyle with the people who moved in there. So reluctantly, I'm going with Tony's recommendation.
David, Okay, Councillor Downey.
Thank you. I'm going to disagree somewhat with what we've already heard from members and say that we should enforce the rules. I think that there is demonstrable harm in that if we've adjudicated something as a planning committee and set conditions, then those conditions should be enforced, and this seems to be the only way we can do it. It's a slightly roundabout way, but it's apparently the only way. If we don't, then we need to ask why we bother putting conditions on in the first place. I think we need to, I think if we do end up voting, because I don't have absolute control over this committee, unfortunately, if we do end up voting to agree with the officer's recommendations, then I think we need to have a very serious look at how those conditions, which are apparently unenforceable, ended up being agreed in the previous committee meeting. I've been looking at the minutes through this meeting. The minutes are not always as clear as we'd like them to be, just through the nature of conversation and debate, but it says that it was resolved that planning application be approved subject to recommendation conditions as subject to the recommended conditions as set out in the officer's report and the updated condition 12 and the condition 18. We need to, if we end up agreeing with that with the officer's current recommendation, we need to have a serious look at how we agreed to conditions that were unenforceable. We need to have a very serious look at what conditions we're adding in future and need to decide whether or not they're enforceable. But my opinion is still that we should go against officer's recommendations this time and enforce the rules. Thank you.
Councillor Pratt.
Thank you. I'm very much of the same opinion as Councillor Downey here. why are we setting conditions? Now, I know that people have moved in, but first of all, why haven't we stopped this before then? And we have had a similar similar problem in our village, where there was planning permission given on the condition that the whole site was sold together. No, the developer took part of it and didn't sell it. And then we've had actually lots of planning applications that have been refused because of that. So here we have something. Now, in terms of the people there, they may have indemnity against the developer for selling houses which are actually blatantly illegal. So I think, and it really, first of all, I think the other thing we ought to be looking at is actually how our enforcement team works, because it's obviously is not doing what it is really should be doing, which is making sure that buildings are built to whatever is on the plans. So I would be actually opposing this and saying, and I think any planning inspector, I may be wrong, but saying if the building is the built form has been different from what has been put down as a planning condition, I would, as a planning inspector, saying, no, this is quite correct, this is incorrect. You should not be building, you should be building to what is being permitted. And so I would be actually opposing these planning conditions because of the demonstrable harm to the neighbour and to the whole community of East Cambs.
And we've got David Ambrose Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose that we approve this application for the benefits of the residents who are actually in place at the moment, but also then fine the applicant £50,000 for breach of those conditions. That was what I proposed. Could I have a seconder, please?
I think we need officer advice here, and I don't believe, and I don't believe it's within our power to do that, and therefore, much as you may be sympathy for it, that is just not something we can do, Councillor Ambrose Smith. Am I right, officers? Well,
I don't think we can do that. Well, that's not within the remit of the local planning authority. Sorry, Chairman.
So, Councillor Everly.
I understand where Councillor Ambrose Smith is coming from. I don't quite know where we've got on that. I think we've determined that recommendation can't stand as it is. So, as there's no seconder, but I would like to propose that we approve this for the following reasons. I don't understand why you think that refusing this is going to penalise the builder. It's going to penalise the residents. And unless we have a system in place where we do this kind of checking earlier, we will always penalise the residents. And that's, I think, to me, unacceptable. So by all means, and I totally agree with everybody about that this is an appalling practice and needs to be looked at. So I would like to think that there's some process to do that. But this does not penalise the builder. This penalises the resident, and therefore I would like to recommend.
I would like to, thank you very much. I'd like to ask officers, if this committee were to agree with officers and approve this application, is there some way where there could be a wording to say, however, maximum compliance is stressed or something, in that a measurer could go around there and find out what the square footage and if there's extra sill money to pay, and you know, the law should be enforced to its full extent.
Yes, I think we could do that because we have an informative for sill, so we can recoup that way, and I'll speak to the sill officer on how they go about doing that.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment. I have to agree with the sentiments expressed by Councillor David Ambrose Smith and, of course, Councillor Huffer. However, I think we have to sadly have some realism. And I think that it's unfortunate, but I would be moving towards agreeing with the officers, but making sure that we got as much compliance, and if that is extra sill money or whatever, that maximum compliance is sought and pushed for. I don't know what members think to that comment. Councillor Downey.
Sorry, I know this isn't the time for questions, but further to Councillor Every's point, I would like to just ask the officers what the effect would be if we didn't approve this application and everything went our way. What would be the effects on the current residents and on the applicant? If that's something you can outline.
So what you're saying, if we refused it and at appeal it was refused, essentially then the developer or the residents potentially would be expected to revert back to the original permission. So for example, plot 2 would have to remove the window and their bedroom, and plot 1 would have to remove their window. All the outbuildings would have to be removed. All the garage doors would have to be removed.
And we've also got a question from Christine Ambrose Smith.
It's a query really for our legal team. Should this not have been put up with the solicitors dealing with the purchase of this? We recently sold a building in the built in the 1980s, and we had to answer numerous questions about whether we had a fence put up in front of the property and whether it was still grass in front of the property and hadn't been altered. So why weren't these questions asked by the solicitor for the purchaser of the other side? That's that question.
Sorry, I can't obviously comment on each individual plot, but something could have been flagged up in the local search. But if they hadn't taken any enforcement action, for example, enforcement notices are actually put on local land charges. If that wasn't there, then they wouldn't be aware that there was actually, you know, the planning permission wasn't in accordance to what it should be. So it may not have been flagged up, and it may not. I mean, I can't really comment. It's conjecture, really.
Okay, we've got Councillor. I've still got Councillor Jones to speak. And I think we've got to the stage where we have a proposal from council. Yes, Councillor Wilson.
If planning conditions are broken, is it possible to record that with the land registry immediately so that
No, that's not recordable at the land registry. If enforcement action is taken, then we put a local land charge on our local land charges system. But if the enforcement action hadn't been taken, that wouldn't be registered there. But it's certainly not registerable with the land registry.
I'm trying to.
But a covenant would be registered with land registry, wouldn't it?
If there are a covenant, yeah, but.
So perhaps we ought to make sure that if we think something's being broken, we make a covenant that it is put right.
I think we are in a bit of a muddle here, and I think we have a proposal from Councillor Trapp, which. Who is it from? Councillor Every, I beg your pardon. And that was the first one you were talking, and I mistook your opinion from a proposal. However, if we have a proposal from Councillor Every, is it, and I feel very much inclined to second you reluctantly, and if there is some way that it can be sort of stressed as a condition, that without sounding as though it's in any way over aggressive, but the law is completely applied as relating to things like SIL or whatever obligations, that any obligations are fully complied with.
Obviously, we'll have the conditions informative. Sally Bonnett's just told me with regard to SIL, any additional payments would come from the new occupiers, not from the applicant. That's correct, isn't it, Sally?
So is there anything that if we gave consent today and agreed with the officer, is there anything that can be in any way charged or action that can be taken?
Any enforcement action, and Sil has Toja said, we go against the landowner. They are responsible for what happens on their land, and when they purchase land, they take responsibility for that land. Planning doesn't punish people; it controls development. So anything we do as this department is controlling if a development is acceptable or not acceptable. We don't get involved if a person has been acceptable. It's if the development is acceptable. So members have to be careful. They are seeking, always ensuring what they're doing is ensuring does the development meet our local plan that's adopted, national policies, that side of things, not judging the applicant or the person who now lives there.
Councillor Downey.
Sorry to speak again, I really didn't want to, but I know that there is a motion already put, but I think it would be especially unfair to end up charging the current tenants still for you know, just having what they got. I think I would like to suggest that we defer this until we can find some kind of resolution which doesn't punish the current owners either with having to pay SIL for what they bought or deal with the outcome of having their planning application that's been forced through this refused.
Before I answer you, Councillor Wilson, can I talk to our legal advisor? Okay, look, we have some sort of decision from our legal advisor, and can you tell us what it is?
Well, Sally just clarified the position with regard to SIL. If the developer's paid the, you know, the SIL already on the actual development, then the additional SIL that will be payable by the residents will only be on the slightly extra floor space. In other words, the garages and the upstairs porches. So it wouldn't be like obviously the full amount of the SIL. With regard to deferring the matter, my advice to the chairman is that we have to look at this on the merits of the application that's before you. You'd have to have a very, very good reason for deferral. I can't see a reason for deferral unless members want to come up with a reason for deferral, but I can't see one. Not one that's based on planning considerations, and it would have to be for planning considerations. So that was my advice to the chairman and to the committee.
So I still have Councillor Downey and Councillor Wilson who want to make some comments. So Councillor Wilson, you've had your hand up longer. So
if the new resident, owner of this land is ended up with an extra bill, a bill which they weren't expecting, they would surely go back to their solicitor and perhaps back to the developer to say, this is something which I shouldn't be paying. And therefore, it would be perfectly reasonable for them to sue either the developer or the
And
or the
be
solicitor.
involved for many,
But-
many years
but-
in a.
But it certainly wouldn't be, they wouldn't necessarily have to pay it. But I think we're stuck with this stupid thing. We haven't got a good reason, a planning reason for turning it down. Every single one of us doesn't want to give this developer any benefit, but it's done now, and I think we're stuck with it. So very
Councillor Trapp.
reluctantly.
I'm sorry, it's not a planning issue, it's actually an enforcement issue. It's not we're talking about humanity, it's a matter of principle. And I must say, I mean, caveat emptor, which is buyer beware, has not been taking place here. The actual conveyancer here has been at fault for not looking at the diagram and saying this is not the house that was being planned. That is a problem. So there's actually legal address for the owners to actually go back to both the solicitor conveyancer and to the developer. When the developer will. So it is a matter of principle here. And I think the fact is that there's 4 people, 4 residents who might be discommoded by this, but they should have been much clearer about what was being built right at the beginning. And we are at fault for not actually forcing it and not fighting it before it was sold. So I don't see there's any problem here at all. I think it's quite outrageous this is happening. And the fact is, we might as well just next time just go, oh yes, let's build anything we want.
I think we're going to have to go to a vote, and I think we're going to have to go to a vote which is as proposed by Councillor Every. And I think very reluctantly, I think I'm going to feel the right thing to do is to second that. We've got some. You've been given the reasoning.
What I've got is that Councillor Every proposed, following the officer recommendation, for the reason that refusing it would penalise the residents and not the builder. But there's also been suggestion of adding a condition regarding obligations.
If I may say, that was a post-angle of what I said. All we need to do is to say that I recommend that we approve it. That's all I need to say. The rest of it is immaterial to the recommendation, I think.
So if we're approving it.
What about there was some discussion about an extra condition or an informative.
I don't think.
The seal will still be on there, but obviously it will go through the usual channels.
And just a reminder, there's a revision to condition 9, as Tony said at the start.
By Councillor Every and seconded by me, that we agree with the officer's recommendation in this case. And will those in favour of that please raise their hands? And those who are against that proposal? And any abstentions?
The motion is passed with 9 votes in favour and 2 votes against.
Before the people from Fordham go, I think you've got some idea of the dilemma we've had with this. And in no way should you take away the presentations you've given and the enthusiastic presentations you've made to us. And we appreciate you coming, and thank you. I think it's pure, it is very understandable, the emotions in this case. Anyway, I'm now going to close the meeting.